Hey friends, welcome to the Glow Getters podcast. My name's Kayla Fahey-Ahrndt, but you can call me KFA because nobody can say that last name. I teach and inspire leaders to step into their power, productive selves, and unlock their fullest potential. I'm a multi-passionate creative and scientist who climbed to the top of the healthcare leadership ladder by age 28, making six figures as a manager. I share what I've learned that I wish I knew when I landed my first leadership role at age 25. You can find more from me on my Patreon site at patreon.com/KFA Glowgetters. Okay, now on to the show. Hey, Coffee with Kayla podcast listeners, thank you for joining me in episode 10. It's all about grit and it's all about grace. So these two terms are ones that have come up in my community lately, and I'm finding a lot of people telling each other, hey girl, give yourself grace, it's okay, or just dig in with that grit. And so I really want to explore grit separately, grace separately, and when you need both together and what that creates. So let's get started. All right, so what is grit? So grit appears when you are just really digging in. You are always wanting to improve. Maybe you're always questioning, why do we do something this way? Or you're determined to fix something. You're never okay with the status quo. You always want to keep moving things forward. You're hardworking and you're always learning. And I think the biggest thing with grit is that you're resilient, right? So you get back up when you fall down, and maybe if you have a setback, you're like, okay, that's fine. And you're going to overcome it and find a different way to do something. I think people who are gritty, in my mind, can always relate back to their why for doing something. So people with grit have purpose and they know what are their priorities, okay? So they can always say, okay, I know this is really important and this is why I'm doing this. So this is why I'm going to keep on keeping on, right? Um, when do you need grit? So I know that when I need grit is when I'm having the shittiest of shitty days, when it's just a terrible day and I'm like, okay, but I need to keep going. Or I just need to redirect and say, all right, tomorrow's a new day, but hey, I did what I could today. I know that today was challenging. Am I defeated? Maybe a little bit, but not overall. I'm going to pick myself back up and I'm going to keep digging in. I think grit is really important when you need structure and you have to remind yourself, okay, I have these things that I need to do to meet my goal, and I'm going to see them through. For me, that's grit. So, what is grace? I found this quote on Pinterest that I really liked, and it said that grace gives kindness to ourselves and others even when it's hard. Yeah, so for me, when I think of grace, I think of, you know, telling yourself it's okay that today was a bad day. It's okay if you didn't maybe feel like you did your best, but you tried. Grace is kind of forgiving yourself for, getting upset or feeling like you failed. I think grace is also just being very reflective on your situation. And I almost think of it as like the classy way to recover from maybe a bad situation. Grace, when I think of someone who's very graceful, it's like they're very coordinated, they're very intentional, someone who's mindful and thoughtful. They have grace and they just kind of float. I think when you're thinking about telling yourself when do you need grace, like I said, it's kind of when you're feeling like you messed up or you need to forgive yourself. I hear a lot of moms say, well, I'm going to give myself grace today, because sometimes you're just feeling like you're not the best version of you or you could have done better, but really you know that in the moment you did the best that you could do. So giving yourself grace is maybe lightening up from some of that grit that you were feeling earlier and surrendering. Um, when you think of grit and grace together, I also think of determination and surrendering. That's kind of the other dichotomy that's very similar is disciplines when you have your purpose, you're driving, like grit, and surrendering is putting your hands in the air, giving yourself grace, and saying, you know what? I know that I can't control every single situation here. I know that I don't have all the answers, and some things I just can't control, and being okay with that. Easier said than done, but that's why we remind ourselves to give ourselves grace. Okay, so let's put grit and grace together, or discipline and surrender together. So, I was in a meeting the other day and we were talking about grit and grace because the CEO of the company I work for has talked about grit a lot and how he really believes in it. And one of the people in my meeting shared basically a Venn diagram, and she made a big circle and then another circle. You know how you make a Venn diagram where they're kind of intersecting, and one side was grit, one side was grace, or one side was discipline and the other was surrender, and the middle was the mix of the two, and she called that flow. And I think that when we want to be successful in our lives or the best version of ourselves, or as you've lived longer and you have more experience, it seems like we have a good mix of both grit and grace. Or we're able to take good qualities from both, and when they come together, we've got what we call flow, and things just go really well. I think that if you're always in the grit or you're always so disciplined, you're very tightly knit and bound. And at least I know for me that in some aspects of my life that works, like the science part of me. But I can't live in that side all the time, 100%. Nor can I always live in the surrender part where it's like, can't control anything, not my problem, there's nothing I can do about it. You know, that piece has its time too, but I can't live in that world either. So you have to find a balance of, I can do this, I'm determined, I have purpose, but I realize that something I can't control, and I can't control everything. And so I'm going to do my best to be purposeful, to have priorities, to move forward, but to not let the things that I can't control or the fears of, um, you know, making mistakes or not showing up the best as I could hold me back. So when you have both grit and grace, or both discipline and surrender, the flow that comes out of it is really, really good. All right, so the CEO of my org talks about the fact that he really likes this person called Angela Duckworth, and she is famous in our community for talking about grit and how organizational grit's really important. So we might have grit on an individual level, like say in healthcare, a lot of us, say you're a doctor or a nurse or a lab professional, whatever. Many of us individually are gritty. You know, we're like, okay, we're going to move this for you. We got this. We're going to take care of you. You're going to be fine. And we dig in. But even more importantly is instead of working in our own silos, and I think this can be transferred across professions, you know, we also, need to be working in teams and with each other and not in silos. And so how can we have organizational grit, or communal grit, I guess is another good word. So I guess the research has found that if there is organizational grit, a lot of that's done through strategies and common goals. Those organizations are high performing and do really well. So, something fun that I learned through Angela Duckworth is that she has a grit scale. So, you can actually go online and take a quiz. I took the quiz, I think it's like 10 questions. It's on her website. It's at angeladuckworth.com/grit-scale. I'll put that in the show notes. And you can just quickly answer the questions and it's going to give you a grit rating. How gritty are you? I think my results were like, I got like a 4.2 out of 5 or something, which was like 80% more gritty than most people. So that was very interesting. And it's just a little fun thing to do. Just a little exercise that you can share and really reflect and think about. Are you gritty? How likely are you to see things through? How resilient are you? Do you feel like you persevere? But then also, do you give yourself grace and give yourself kindness? Let things go. I think I said on Instagram the other day, let that shit go. It's been that kind of week, folks. So I apologize for that. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this shorter episode on grit and grace and finding your flow. I'd really love to hear from you about how you find grit and grace in your everyday, in your work, in your family life. Tell me more about it. So you can direct message me on Instagram. You can find me at my personal handle at Kayla_Cerulean. That's in the show notes. Otherwise, you can follow this podcast at Coffee with Kayla Podcast. Remember, coffee is spelled with a K. Send me a message. I'll be posting on my Instagram stories. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me more about your grit and your grace experience and when you best find flow. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Hope you have a great week. Whoa, that went by way too fast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Glow Getters Podcast. You can get the bonus content for this podcast at my Patreon site at www.patreon.kfaglowgetters. And also you can check me out on Instagram at Kayla Fahey-Ahrndt. All right, everyone, until next time, be a light in the world. Talk to you soon.